Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Are you a dog owner? Are you a dog lover? Are you aware that your dog, according to some legislation that apparently has just passed, could be and is likely to be at risk, could be put down, put to sleep forever, a loved member of your family, taken away from you by some faceless authority? Is it really true? Well, according to my guest today, that is likely, but it goes deeper than this, which is why I wanted to have my guest on today. Her name is Kelly. She's had experience in the veterinary practice, and we're talking about specifically XL bullies, which is a type of dog. Now, you might look at them and go, oh my goodness, that is a dangerous dog, or you may say, oh, look at that wonderful, beautiful breed of dogs. What could possibly go wrong? Well, apparently a lot can go wrong. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Hi.
It's lovely to have you on board. Now, I am a dog lover. When I was a kid, I had a dog, and an ex-girlfriend of mine had a little Dachshund, which was a yappy little thing, but a very crazy, mad little thing. We're not really talking about Dachshunds, although they can, give you a severe bite. But this is more than just the occasional dog giving somebody a bite and somebody having a moan about it and taking them away.
That's correct. The legislation, the breed-specific legislation, was first introduced in 1991 for the American Pit Bull Terrier. We do have other breeds of dog that are banned on that, but particularly when it came into the forefront of people's mind, and when I speak about it today, it was the Pit Bull Terrier that launched everybody's, put it in the forefront of everyone's mind. Now, what happened was when the legislation first came about, it made sure the policy was that all pit bull terriers needed to be microchipped, they needed to be neutered, they needed to be on a lead and muzzled, they needed to be insured, and neutered to prevent them from reproducing. The
Is
problem
that because, sorry to interrupt you, is that because they are intrinsically dangerous dogs, or that's what the perception has been?
that's what the perception has been. So before the legislation was brought in, I personally started to see that societal changes were already, happening, and not a lot was actually being done, to address these problems.
Right.
However, the dogs unfortunately became the scapegoat. So everyone pointed the finger, and there was a massive big media campaign. And more often than not, the media that um, discuss these matters are not qualified behaviourists. Some of them don't even own dogs. They've got no authority to be able to speak on specific issues. But here we are, they demonise dogs all over the media. And the worst thing is, half of them don't even know what breeds are. The amount of times we've seen written in the newspaper, a specific dog may have got into an altercation, and when you actually get to the crux of it, it was a completely different dog that was responsible. But
Right.
by then, the damage is already done. People,
Yes.
in their minds, they already think that dogs are dangerous, or they don't take into consideration that it's on a case by case individual basis, or what could be driving that initially. So
Yes.
back in 1991, the government then turned around and said, we need to ban this specific breed because apparently it was going to stop everyone, for dog attacks and whatnot, for public safety. There's that word again, public
Public
safety.
said yes. Well, everything's done. Everything is done for our benefit, apparently.
Yeah, I've worked with bull breeds of all caliber, and I can honestly say they are some of the most fantastic dogs. They're no different from any other dog if they're in a responsible hands. It's all
Yes.
down to education at the end of the day. But what worries me is when the legislation was brought in. So, for argument's sake, I'll tell you what happened. So, when I was working at the vets, we had people bringing in their Staffordshire Bull Terriers at the time. This was before the legislation came in. I worked in North London in a fantastic practice in North London, and when we was vaccinating, people would say, "Oh, there's a little bit on the vaccination card says what breed, and everyone's, oh, it's a pit bull, it's a pit bull, because that's how society was becoming."
Yes.
So when the legislation first came in, my boss at the time, he said, "Oh, I don't agree with it, because it's not a one size fits all." My
Right.
boss actually used to, sorry, train dogs
No,
for the
no. I
RAF.
was just going
So
to say your vet would know that certain, that just because it's a breed doesn't mean it's a dangerous dog.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So what happened was he was really reluctant to get the tattoo equipment and stuff, but unfortunately, what we thought was law back then, so we went out and
So
got all the equipment.
what were they doing? You said tattoo equipment. What were they doing then to these
So it's a
dogs?
registration basically. So when the dog was in to have the neuterings, whether it was castration or hysterectomy, we used to have to tattoo a number just underneath the leg, and that went down as the registration as exempt on the government books.
Right.
So and without that, without all the strings attached, the police could come in, stick your door in without, just literally on hearsay, seize your dog, and then the families would be put through hell.
So, blimey. So, in other words, they could say that you've got a dangerous dog for whatever reason. The police can come along and take it. And the exemption, does that make them exempt from that?
Well, technically speaking, yes. But then saying that once you've contracted in a certain way, there's
Yes.
more strings that are attached to that,
We all know
So,
about the contracts and stuff. And I mean, we're all learning all this stuff. And it's amazing how one thing which is over here about something completely different suddenly is applying to your family pet.
yes. So the concerning thing was, so when we got the equipment and it all kicked in, we started to tattoo, and we ended up doing about, I think it was about 8 dogs in total in our area.
Right.
And my boss turned around and said, "So where's all these pit bulls that we had, in our on our database? Because they just disappeared overnight and they became something else." I won't say what else they became because I don't want to give more light onto more innocent dogs for the state to then turn around and say, it's these particular dogs now that need to be
Oh, I
looked
see. So
into, if
they were
that
sort of
makes sense.
like redesignated as something else, but they were still on your system.
Yes,
Right.
yeah,
Okay. Just to help the owners out.
yeah.
So so you said to me before we started recording, just so I was got some vague idea of what was going on. The idea of this was to effectively to neuter the dogs and to make them extinct, so people couldn't buy them. Is that right?
Yes, because the ban actually meant that you couldn't own a pit bull in the UK. So obviously they gave you the opportunity to neuter, and the dog was allowed then to go on the exemption register and live out the rest of its life, providing it didn't have, any altercations throughout its
Yes.
life. And what I mean by altercations, I don't mean the dog being responsible. Somebody just, saying, "Oh, there's a pit bull next door," and
Oh, I
causing
see.
a
And
hell.
someone, I mean, so in other words, someone could be just, move into the flat next door and just be worried because they've heard a dog or they've seen it and gone, oh, blimey, that's a dangerous dog, report it. And on that simple hearsay or that supposition,
Yeah, I
that
mean
that was enough.
the campaign originally in 1991, especially the one that the media led, was they demonized the breed,
Right.
and everyone in everyone's psyche, they just automatically assumed that every bull breed was some sort of psycho that was going to attack their little poodle or something,
Yes.
and
Yes.
that's wrong. Because they don't. I mean, Staffordshire Bull Terriers, for instance, they're nanny dogs. The most of the bull breeds are fantastic, well balanced dogs in responsible hands, but they never get the voice to, you know, unfortunately, the legislation is what it is, and that's how the states decided to apply it, administrate it.
So are all these dogs under this bracket of XL bullies?
No, so initially, it was American pit bull terriers,
Right.
and then we had the societal breakdown from that specific legislation in 1991, which was what I wanted to discuss with you as well, because there's a bigger picture than just somebody saying on the news that this particular breed is vicious, because they're
Yes.
not.
No.
So also in 1991, we also had quarantine laws for when you used to go
Bring
out
dogs
of the
in.
country. Yeah, and how it used to work. And there's a reason why I'm mentioning this, because it does impact on the legislations that are allowed to be rolled out later on, as time passes. So quarantine measures, you could it wasn't allowed to have the rabies vaccine, for instance, unless it had post approval. So if somebody was going on holiday and they wanted to take their dog on holiday, for argument's sake, Romania, and if that country was known to have rabies, we would have to, I'm going to give my age away now, we'd have to fax the embassy over in Romania and say, is there a problem with rabies currently at the moment? And if the answer is yes, they'd have to fax us back. Then we'd have to stamp it. And that's the stamp would then give us the authority to actually order the rabies vaccine for the client.
Right. So
But the
then the
reason
dog
why,
would be,
yeah,
vaccinated so it could go.
yeah. And then if they didn't come in, we was only allowed to hold it for 48 hours, because it was technically classed as a live vaccine. So there was quite a lot of criteria just around that one policy alone that worked in our favour on our own soil, in our own jurisdiction. Because
Yes.
what's happening now is, so after that happened, during that time, they were then, so we had the breed specific legislation coming in, that came into force in 1991, and then in the early 2000s, they started to toy with relaxing quarantine and bringing in pet passport. Now, pet passport, in my humble opinion, has caused this country so much harm, in more ways than one. And when I mean our country, it's been very bad for our animals as a whole. And I'll explain this, because what's happened now is where the borders are open, the societal breakdown with gangs and everything else, they can now just bring in what they like across the border.
Right.
So
Even including pit bulls.
so they'll say, but not so much the pit bulls side of it, but they will bring in other breeds of dog, and that will then become fashionable.
Oh, right. I'm with you.
So what's happened is now is when they relaxed that, they totally relaxed our border in 2003. And when I say they, I mean the European Union actually had a big
Right.
part to play
Yes.
in that. And technically they shouldn't have been allowed to, because we have quarantine for a reason. But unfortunately, when you have such a porous border and poor regulation and poor, enforcement, lots of stuff happens. And basically a lot of that has also contributed to what happened in 1991, with drugs being introduced onto the streets, and all that. Now, unfortunately, the pit bull terrier was already then exempt by that time, but our borders are open and we've still got dogs, different types of dogs coming in, bigger. Now, the people that are normally involved in bringing those sort of dogs in, very, very rarely do they get any attention from the authorities. They are initially the ones that shouldn't have um, dogs. They are the ones that encourage the genetic bad breeding. They're the ones that encourage the dog fighting. In fact, the good proportion of these particular pockets of society are wholly responsible for why now we have a blanket ban and why every dog is on that list. But it amuses me, not in a funny way, that the authorities can turn a blind eye. So they can go and kick old Ethel's door in because she might have, what seems to be a type dog. But then when you've got a particular gang who's cutting dogs' ears off, cropping their ears in the back garden to make them, you know, look
Look more
aggressive, sound
violent or something.
aggressive, or
Yes.
they don't have. It's become a business model for the majority of these people, so they're not genetically making sure that they're breeding sound dogs necessarily, or
Right.
so those dogs are going out into the public domain and into the population. It's not the dog's fault. It's the people's
It's the
fault.
people. So are you saying that the gangs of people will be bringing these dogs in? They'll have a passport in order to get past the border.
Wow.
but the passport might not be as kosher as you might
No,
imagine.
definitely not. So um, the pet passport scheme was technically floated about so that Fifi could go on holiday and come and go as she wanted. But because obviously the policies changed now, we then started to have NGOs working in other countries. Now, there are a lot of cruelty cases in other countries, I acknowledge that. Um, However, a lot of the time now, that particular activity is also now impacting on how we are able to control things in our country. So, for argument's sake, if so, before when you had a quarantine measure that was already in place, if there was any discrepancy with payment or anything like that, it could have been dealt with on our soil because it was done on our soil.
Yes.
What's happening now is a lot of dogs are coming in from overseas from bad breeders, and they're able to come in on a pet passport, and I say that quite loosely. Um, and a lot of the time, the pet passports are actually forged. Now we know that these are forged because specifically, if a dog was to come in, so if we had a dog, for instance, he had epilepsy and he was booked in for travel on a what's classed as pet transport to come into the country. Now, because he had epilepsy, the policy is that the drugs that the dog needs has to be recorded on that passport, and so therefore it's authorised to come through and into our country. And then that dog then has to be registered with a vet, so then the vet can take it from there. But what's actually happening is there's actually drugs now coming in that aren't warranted with half of the dogs that are on those transports. So now we've not only got dogs coming in, we've now got drugs coming in as well. Whether
So,
that
so sorry, just explain.
That's
So the
fine.
dog comes in,
Yeah.
and with it comes a parcel containing the drugs that it needs. Is that what you're saying?
Technically, that's how it's supposed to work. So it should be documented that the dog's had epilepsy and needs this
Yeah.
medication in transit, just in case anything happens.
Yes.
And there's normally just a limited amount that's given and authorised to go on that transport. But what we actually found was that the transport was actually carrying pharmaceuticals that weren't actually legal, lawful, or authorised
Oh, I
to be
see.
on the transport. But because the borders was coming in under a guise of something else, they were able to bring it in across the border.
So some form of smuggling, effectively.
So it is smuggling, and it's, to be honest, there's nobody's held accountable then, because what happens is, I'm sorry to say it, but I do have to bring it to people's attention. Rescue has got very heavily invested in bringing dogs in from overseas. Now, I haven't got a problem with anybody that brings a dog in as long as it's done properly, ethically, and to be honest, if they've actually had the opportunity to spend some time with this dog. This is not what's happening. We've got rescues bringing in loads of dogs. Technically, they're only supposed to transport five, but I've seen vans where they're literally packed to the rafters with 20, 30 dogs. And it's become quite lucrative in the sense of, so somebody will see a dog on social media, and yes, what goes on in other countries is absolutely vile. I don't, condone it. It's absolutely disgusting. But the hearts and minds of the people in this country obviously want to help those dogs, so therefore they want to bring them in. But what's happening is they then have to pay by PayPal or some other transaction. So the money's now through these NGOs. So now the money's completely unaccountable and it's gone offshore. So it's difficult when there's a discrepancy. The dog might turn up sick,
Right.
or not turn up at all, or turn up dead. And
So
then, sorry,
Sorry, no, it's all right. When you mentioned that the rescue, as you say, does I'm completely
no,
ignorant here,
that's
so
fine.
please.
It is complicated and it's a bit of a raw subject.
Yeah, no. So with the rescue, then, can that only be done by a special organisation like the RSPCA, or
No,
can individuals apply to rescue a dog through some system, or can they just do it individually on the back of their own and say, I just want to bring this dog in. I've got a passport which I bought from a man down a blind alley with a wooden leg, and it's perfectly fine now to bring that in and with very little attention.
Anybody can open up a rescue because they're not regulated, or call themselves a rescue and turn it
Oh,
into a business model.
right.
There's no easy way to skirt around it,
No.
unfortunately. And I,
So if right, okay. So effectively anybody can bring in massive amounts of unknown dogs with vague passports, with unknown temperaments and requirements such as medical, which may or may not actually be for the dog. It may even be for the owner, or somebody the owner wants to sell that particular medical requirement to. Let's put it as delicately as that.
yeah,
And so would you say that then this could be a trafficking thing?
100%,
100, right, okay.
100%. And I would just like to take the opportunity to say that I do know that there's some fantastic rescues out there that do fantastic work, and they are honest
Yes.
and trustworthy. My The reason why I need to bring it to the attention is because everyone wants to do good. Everybody their
Yes.
heart's in the right place. But what often gets missed is the bigger picture. So, they don't see what their action or inaction or indirect action actually impacts elsewhere, if that makes sense. And I don't blame anybody at all. I just need to point that out.
No. Now, so what about so obviously there's the good people doing it, and then there's just bad eggs, and we get bad eggs in every profession. You know it's very difficult to stop that.
Yeah.
But is this being done on a large scale, and is that what we should be worried about?
So yes, again, unfortunately, not so much now. It slowed down since we had the cost of living crisis over here, because nobody's really got any money to
Right.
do
I,
what they like. So
I'm thinking on the bad eggs doing it. Is it like on a industrial scale that dogs are being brought in?
100%, yeah,
Right.
100%, yeah. And I find that the timing of all of this coincidental, because in 2003, as I said, they introduced a pet passport, and then after that, we started to see a big breakdown of our services. So what we were saying just before this interview started, years ago, we used to have private vets, then we used to have charitable vets, where the little old lady Bessa could go down if a cat was a bit sick and just make a donation. What's actually happened now is that since the pet passport's come in, a lot of the corporations have started to tighten their grip. So we've lost a lot of charity uh, based organisations where they would actually help an old lady, help her cat out. And we've got more um, corporations. So we've got the chains. So we had a lot more private vets that were independent family run vets. Now we have big chain vets that seem to be able to outprice or, compete with the honest family
Yes.
run vet.
Yeah. Right. So are you suggesting there then that because I mean, and corporate Britain is everywhere. Every family-run business or sole trader is under threat at the moment because of the cost of living and the cost of everything, whereas corporations seem to be just
Oh, they're loving
taking
it.
up.
Yeah.
So are the corporations, these big chain companies, are they seeing these bad eggs bringing in the dogs as just a way of making money and facilitating it without becoming, shall we say, morally involved? In other words, they're just turning a blind eye. Yeah, you can come. This farming of people coming through is coming through us, and we're not taking the responsibility, but we're making shed loads of cash.
So again, I'm sorry to say, you're 100% correct. And I
And
know
I was
this.
rather worried that you were going to say that.
Yeah, you are correct again, because I myself personally have spoken to the regulators to bring to the attention. I've been screaming to have our borders closed for a very long time, because not only will it control what's going on in our country and give us the power and the strength to be able to put right all the wrongs that have been done, we can then obviously then that's when we can start looking, elsewhere and saying, oh, can we help here? I've got friends that work overseas in rescue, and they do fantastic work, but they do it there. They
Yes,
don't.
yes.
Oh, sorry, Richard.
It's all right.
Um, but what's happening now is so. For example, there was a lovely lady I got to know. She brought in a dog from Romania. So, because in 2014, they done a massive big media launch on publicising the fact that the Romanian government were going to literally butcher their dogs over there. And the dog catchers were making so many euros at the time for catching these dogs, and they were putting in humane kennels. And to be honest, the brutality is sickening. So
Right.
I can understand why everybody jumps on board and wanted to help, and I still can. I'm not naive,
No.
but because of the bigger picture, it just basically the more we thump this dog, the more they're going to pay. That's how it can't. So we've had the breakdown of services. So if I could just touch on that as well. So they started to close down. Obviously, they've corporatized everything when it comes to the vets. Insurance companies are exactly the same. So to give you another example, when I was working in practice with my boss, we had a very old English Bull Terrier, bless her, who came in. I think she had a lump on her neck or something. I can't quite remember. But while she was under the anaesthetic, we cleaned her teeth. We took a wart off her eye. And as far as we were concerned, we'd done her nails and cleaned her ears. We gave her an MOT. And we thought we'd do that to stop her having to come in again unnecessarily and then, being under an anaesthetic, which gets quite risky.
Yes.
Now, as far as we was concerned at the time, she had come in for one day. She was under one lot of vet care. She had one lot of pain relief, one lot of antibiotics. Everything was all under one umbrella.
Mm.
And when the client put her insurance in, they took excess off the teeth, off the wart. They literally broke down everything. And I think the client got something like £15 back. So they
Blimey.
didn't want to help.
No.
So we wanted
So,
to help, but they wouldn't. So the reason why I'm mentioning all this as well is because the police used to have a big responsibility with stray dogs. So because
right.
before 1991, I might go sort of backwards and forwards, but we used to have a dog license back in the 80s. I think it was about 40p or something, and
Do
then
we
they
still not
abolished
have a?
that.
Do we not have a dog license now?
No, it's been completely abolished.
Oh, okay.
The only documentation that you need now, as far as I'm aware, is exemption for what they class as a brand breed, but there's no licenses. But then I see a lot of professionals asking for licenses, and I can understand the argument in the sense of we need to know who's responsible and who's got the dogs now.
Right.
But saying that licenses are another form of contract,
Well, yes.
which comes with strings. When deep down we could just say, look, if you just enforce the law that was already there instead of ignoring all the bad apples and then bringing in more legislation to create revenue and grow your corporate enterprise, maybe we might actually start getting somewhere, if that makes sense.
Yes. So you just said that the police used to deal with stray dogs. I'm just correlating back
Yeah.
with these dogs that have been coming in, which may or may not really be for the purpose of bringing dogs in. They may be for other purposes or whatever. Presumably, these people bringing the dogs in have either got, they're not. If they've got a big van load of dogs, they're not really keen to keep all those dogs, I'm suggesting, or they're selling them, or they're fighting them, or they're doing, illegal things with them, which is obviously despicable, or these dogs get loose and they're living on the streets.
Yep. So again, yes to all three of everything that you've just said. So the ones that I've turned it into a business model, 9 times out of 10, the people will just see a plight on social media with a video, pay for a dog. They've never met the dog. The dog's been pulled in off the street. It doesn't have any human interaction whatsoever. And I don't blame the dog. Dogs present behaviours specific ways. They're just acting naturally.
Yes,
Doesn't mean that
yes,
they're aggressive. They're just exhibiting natural canine behaviour. But when you've got somebody that doesn't understand canine behaviour at all, it's quite easy then to say, well, that dog's aggressive, which is what they've done technically with the
yes,
people initially at the beginning. Um, the really sad thing is then vans leave our country and then they go over to the prospective countries where the dogs have been, where they're being collected from. Now, this is a massive worry because, as I said, the dogs are often transported for 3, 4, 5 days at a time in very cramped conditions. Um, and then when they get here, and again, the passports are very questionable, but when they get here, most of the time they go to service stations, and the people that have, I say, loosely adopted the dogs from overseas as their own pets, are just handed the dogs at, the drop-off points, and they have no clue how to handle said dog.
Oh, I see. So when you say service stations, you mean literally motorway service
Yep,
stations,
yep,
and
yep.
so they come in, they have some prearranged meeting
Agreement.
place
Yep,
agreement, and they go, "Here's your dog, mate," and money changes hands,
yep.
and then the
The
person
the money usually changes hands before the dog comes on transport.
right,
Um,
and then they end up with a dog which has got psychological problems because A, of the country, and B, of the journey, and B, it's not had human interaction,
yeah,
and so you end up with a dog whose behavior has not been trained from a puppy or anything like that to be integrated into the society that we have.
exactly. And the funny thing is, there was actually a big push overseas in Europe for trap, neuter, and release
For
because
what?
they're sorry, they call it TNR in rescue. It's trap, neuter, and release because it's recognised that there are a lot of wild dogs or street dogs, as it's known, that need to be neutered to stop them from overpopulating because they
Right.
start competing with each other as well. So, but unfortunately, I understand that the funds that were allocated for that big push, I think it was 4.8 million, disappeared.
Right.
And then it was actually shortly after in 2014 that we had to then take in these dogs from Romania.
Gosh. Right. So now at the beginning, you were talking about XL bullies, and
Yep.
you were telling me that dogs can be identified as being potentially dangerous just by the look at them, and it may not even be the breed that has been, let's say, designated that anybody's dog on hearsay really can be taken away.
Yeah. So the breed specific legislation under the Dangerous Dogs Act, you've got the main categorized breeds, but there
And
is
what are they?
so you've got the Dogo Argentino, you've got the Brazilian Mastiff. I can never pronounce that one, so I apologize. The American Pit Bull Terrier and the Japanese Tosa. And now we've got the extra large bullies on that as well,
And
which is
so
recent.
now, I just for the sake of argument, I wanted to show the picture of these XL bullies, which I'd never heard of, but I recognise them. Not being a dog, particularly. I mean, I like dogs, but I've never really owned one myself. And I've just called these up on the internet so that there's no chicanery going on here. So these are the type of these are XL breed dogs
Yes, with cropped ears.
with cropped ears. I mean, they look friendly enough, don't they?
They're beautiful, absolutely beautiful. It
But I can understand how some people can look at them and be a little bit frightened because they're not like poodles
well, everyone has
or
their own.
dachshunds.
Yeah, everyone has their own preference of dog. It doesn't mean to say that all dogs are bad, which is
Right.
another reason why the blanket ban is absolutely ludicrous, especially when you don't have a fair opportunity to even argue your case.
And I mean, if these dogs are brought up in a normal way, in a loving family from a pet, not from a pet because they're a pet, but from a puppy, they would be perfectly normal dogs. They're not likely to attack anybody. They'd be perfectly safe to be amongst small children and older people, would they?
They are absolutely renowned for being fantastic around the family if raised correctly. They are technically known as nanny dogs.
Are they?
Yep. And at the end of the day, yes, there are some genetic problems, but that's down to bad breeding and the pockets in society that I was referring to, but it doesn't mean to say that every XL bully can't be around children. But that's what the government's decided to do.
So at the in your email that you sent me, hang on,
Yeah,
let me just come back out
no
of this.
problem.
In the email that you sent me, you suggested that because this new legislation has happened, there is a chance that many of these dogs are going to be found and put down.
Yep. So there was a push just before the initial amendment come into force, where they were getting people to voluntarily take these dogs into the vets to be euthanized for the cost of £200 compensation. The dog's not done anything wrong. It's just
Um,
fit.
yeah, so
Sorry.
actually, it's not just being neutered and allowed to die out; it's actually being
Yeah, so
killed.
because it's just coming into proper force now, they were giving people the opportunity to get their dogs exempt and have things put in place what the state requires them to do. Um, and then obviously there was some other bits going on in the background as well, and one of them was to take their dogs down to get put to sleep for £200 compensation, which I think is absolutely disgusting. And to be perfectly honest, Richard, it's so immoral because most of the people that did do that did so because they were fearful that the state was going to come in and literally treat their family like criminals for owning a type of dog that the state didn't approve of, that the majority of the public at large have no clue about.
Right. No, absolutely. And they were using again fear in order to get people to do their bidding.
Yes. The local councils, for argument's sake, they're actually now threatening to evict people if they're found to have this type of dog in their homes. So this has a massive impact. This is potentially making people homeless now. So this isn't just a straightforward black and white issue here. This is quite a big problem that's being created when it's totally unnecessary. It's okay for somebody to turn around and say, I've heard the media
Mm.
say that dog's a big bad dog, but what they don't realise is the impact down the road where somebody's actually been evicted out of their house for doing absolutely nothing wrong. I actually knew a lovely lady called Susan Livingston. She did say that I could actually mention her name today because she was evicted out of her home. She went to live in the car with her dogs because she couldn't give them up. And the police still came to the car and they still seized the dogs regardless.
Oh,
And we know people have taken their lives because these dogs were the only thing that they had.
yes.
They were the only family they had. So the
Yes.
media have a lot to answer to.
Well, they certainly do, and on many different levels. Um, so this is still the situation that if you've got one of these dogs, the likelihood is that you might, because of this legislation, you may well get a visit from somebody saying we have every right to take your dog away. And you said something about if they sign a certain document, you're effectively giving away the title and the right to that dog, which is, like anything where you register something, you're giving away the title to things, and then they can do what they damn well like with it. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah. So basically, when the police are so outside of exemption, the police can come, as I said, on hearsay or because somebody might be a bit nervous and come and seize the dog. And if they suspect the dog is type, they can take the dog away. Now, they will try and get the people or the owners, should I say, to sign a document to say that that's taken place. The sad thing is, when most people sign that document, that literally instructs the police to destroy the dog immediately. So if you don't sign that document, you then get to go to court. Your dog, some more often than not, gets seized and taken into police custody into unknown kennels, and the who knows how long you've got because you don't get to see the dog. The dog's ripped away from its family,
Yeah,
put in
it's
a
dreadful.
kennel, doesn't understand what's going on. So naturally, the dog's going to be very confused with the situation. Even when the dogs are seized, they act. Some dogs act display normal behaviour. If you've got a load of people coming to your home with a big dog catcher, they're coming to
Yes.
take your dog. It's natural that the dog might get reactive.
It's
but
going
they'll
to
put,
protect. It's going to protect its owner, isn't it?
yeah, or itself, because it's
Or
been
it's yes,
threatened,
exactly yes.
you
So of
know.
course it's going to display a behaviour that is not normal, because in normal circumstances you don't have the dog catcher with his big net or whatever coming to capture it.
That's correct. And then
See, when you say it goes to court, then presumably the family or the owner of the dog has a chance to say, actually, this breed is this, and it's a perfectly fine dog, and the judge, being kind, benevolent, and all the rest of it, goes, oh yes, sorry, a bit of a mistake. You can have your dog back. I'm assuming that's what happens. I have a fear that you might say it isn't.
I'm smiling now because yes and no on that one, because technically speaking, it's unlawful what they're doing anyway. But
Yes.
once it gets to court, 9 times out of 10, it can take a long, long time for the families to get that court date. So in the meantime, that family now, because they're not eligible for legal aid, which again is unlawful in this country because everyone should have representation in this country, um, what happens then is they then have to rely on public donations to raise the funds. So
Right. Or sell something like their
yeah,
house.
they'll sell something. It could be literally anything, and they could lose their jobs. This is again, this isn't just a one size fits all, but the
Yes.
entire experience is what I would call base as terrorism. It's a form of terrorism. Um,
Is it a special court that they have to go to? I mean, they don't just go to a magistrate's court and say, "Oh, you've got my dog. Can I have it back, please?" It's all right. It may look a bit vicious, but it's just like a chihuahua.
Yeah. So again, unfortunately, the majority of this is done behind closed doors in magistrates' courts. There's no proper representation.
No
It's
record, I suppose.
no, yeah, and also it's on hearsay of the dog expert witness. There's no jury present to even look into evidence. It's pretty much a cut and shut.
It's a kangaroo court,
Yeah, we said
although there's no kangaroos actually present, but it's
yeah.
that kind of thing. And I think you said to me before we started recording that there are no dog experts necessarily in the court who can identify the dog as that specific breed anyway.
So they can part of the build up to getting the dog back is they have to bring in what they call a dog expert witness. Now, the dog expert witness is qualified in proper canine behaviour, not a media assault. These are people with hands-on
Yes.
experience. But that said, it's not just a case. So they have to basically prove that that dog isn't an aggressive dog. Um, they will have to write a report to say that and then there's also criteria they have to agree. If they get their dog back, then they have to go on the exemption register, which then gets them to register again
Oh.
onto a register to then obviously get neutered, tattooed, and everything else.
And who chooses? Oh, so it has to be neutered at the end of that.
Yep.
So who chooses the dog expert?
Well, that's a tricky one because I know a lot of very capable, experienced dog trainers that would be more than sufficient in doing a behavioural check on a dog. But there's also then a specific group of behaviourists that are only recognised as dog expert witnesses. So the jury's out on that one, to be honest. I don't
Right.
know who picks them, but
But oh right, so I mean, is it the owner doesn't say I've got a dog expert? Here's his opinion, or
well,
is it the court?
so the court will only recognise a dog expert witness. However, um, there are only specific dog expert witnesses you can
Oh,
use.
I see what you're saying. So yeah, a little bit of a backhander to them could influence their decision. Not
Well,
saying
one
it happens, but
a,
could do.
£1,000 consultation to go into police custody to assess a dog is quite a good.
It's quite lucrative, isn't it? Yeah. Well, I think I'll get a new job. Yeah, that's definitely a poodle.
But
It may be 6 foot high, but it's only a poodle.
the thing the thing that I need to outline as well is a lot of the dogs, if they do manage to go back to their families, the majority of the time they go back absolutely petrified.
Yes, I'm not
Some of them,
surprised.
yeah, they also have lost condition. They've been, they haven't been fed properly. You know, there's a whole host of issues that go on, and then the dog's got to then try and slide back into that family environment again after being traumatized, you know. But the only people that actually make any money or get any benefit, should I say, out of this entire situation. So you've got the police technically taking the dogs into kennels in the first place. So the people that have to fight to get their dogs back have to stump up the kennel fees.
Yes.
Then you've got the vets, rightly or wrongly, they're they're the only ones in this country that can actually neuter legally, lawfully neuter
So for
animals
every dog that
humanely. Yeah,
goes into
so
court, they're
yeah,
going to be new. Yeah. So the vets are employed.
yeah. The vets are employed, the kennels are employed, even people that make the muzzles. You know, there's revenue everywhere. The contracts for the kennels for the food. The only people that lose out in this whole game is the families that are being put through this and the dogs ultimately with their lives.
Yes. And
While they also turn a blind eye to actually what's going on behind closed doors in other pockets of society. It's
with these other
almost,
gangs bringing stuff in.
yeah, it's almost as if they want to bring this into the country to allow it to manifest so then they can point the finger and say, that's your fault.
Right.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. No, it does.
Because they're not
It.
doing anything.
So, what about the RSPCA? Are they concerned about this?
Um,
Without getting yourself into a
yeah,
libelous situation, are
I'm just
they? Yeah.
That's right. To be perfectly honest with you, anything with royal ahead of it, I'm not going to trust it.
Right.
That's all I
Okay.
can say on that matter.
Yeah. So that let's just say they're not helpful.
They're not helpful, no.
That's fair enough.
They might come out and say, oh, you know, this is the problem or that's the problem, but technically, no one's actually addressing the problem.
Right.
You know,
Absolutely.
because
Yeah.
because the government's not enforcing the law that was initially already there in the first place. This is before even the legislation came out in 1991. So it's all well and good coming out, Richard, and saying, oh, you know, it's because of this, because of that. But the government, the buck ultimately stops at the government.
So what can people do? I mean, what? I mean, you're telling us, and people will be going, "Wow, this is outrageous," and you know, another reason to write to an MP to embarrass him at the awful state of the government, along with all the other million letters they get, and hopefully they'll do the right thing by resigning. But what can people do?
So the best advice I can give is to say no, you don't consent because all of it is unlawful. It's
You're not consenting
unconstitutional.
to. Yeah, you're not consenting to what?
You're not consenting to being terrorized and having money, which is technically being levied out of you through threats of having your door kicked in.
Yes.
You know, that's unconstitutional. The law was already in place on a case by case. If there is a victim, then fair enough, you can go to a criminal court and it can be heard the proper way
Can
of a
can a
jury.
dog be a victim?
The dog technically is a victim, and I'll tell you for why. There's a bit of an argument going on at the moment where a lot of people will and I do agree with them. Dogs have feelings, you know, they're sentient beings, but under the law, they're classed as property.
Right.
You know, it's no
Yes.
different from someone taking your bike. So, but having 2 feet in both camps, so to speak, you could argue if it's classed as property that the state has got an overreach on the fact that it's corporatized in the sense of you're stealing someone's property, which is unconstitutional because you're causing alarm, distress, criminal damage, extortion, fraud.
Yes.
You know,
So, well, what are other animal lovers doing about this? Is this something that really people don't know about, don't really understand until the door is kicked in by the police and somebody's said, "Oh, you've got a dodgy dog," or is there a movement to make matters better?
so there are a lot of rescues that are aware of what's happening. I mean, they have to pick up the pieces all of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, when we're talking about today, we've touched on XL bullies, but what's
Yes.
happening because they're trying to save the XL bullies, other dogs now are finding it hard to now find rescue space because it's created that vacuum. So now
Oh, I
there's
see.
more. So now there's more dogs now being destroyed because of the legislation. There's more heartbreak, and because of the cost of living crisis, as I said earlier, it's not just a straightforward. It has huge implications. Cost of living crisis, people being forced to surrender their dogs, um, and it, what upsets me, Richard, is this has been going on for a long time. So I witnessed a lot of cruelty back in 1991. In fact,
Mm,
I would have said we was technically classed as a third world back then because society wasn't addressing the problems back then.
gosh.
But
Yeah.
what I can see now, it takes about 40 rescues to find one kennel space now for a dog before its face is being put to sleep. Which is, if I could just bring on to something that I did note, if you've got a stray dog, 9 times out of 10, it has to go to a council pound. It's supposed to be the law, and it gives the owner the opportunity to come forward, and it's normally 7 days. If an owner surrenders a dog to a pound, it's unfortunate that that poor dog is then given technically a death sentence. It's only got 48 hours to find a rescue space. So this big vacuum that this legislation has caused, where everyone's scrambling to find space anyway, the legislation's now put a massive amount of pressure on top of an already dire problem. So what happens is, I always said, so if someone comes forward with their and comes to claim the dog, what happens is the pound, which is run by the council, which is a corporation, then fines the owner for collecting their dog. So what happens is, me personally, people's dogs escape for different reasons. It doesn't necessarily mean that the person's been irresponsible. And I've always said that the councils could do more to address the situation. So if a dog ended up in their care, say for straying for the first time, why not just, slap their wrist a little bit and just let them take their dog back? Because what that will then do is free up the kennel space that is needed. And also it will prevent those people from going out and getting another dog. Because it's just, we're talking about supply and demand here now as well. But
So
they don't
what
do that.
they no. So, and what is the charge to pick up a dog? I mean, is it extensive?
I think it's £150.
So if you haven't got a lot of money and your dog has run off and you think, oh well, it was getting on a bit, I'll let the council deal with it. I'll save 150 quid.
Yep, that's 100. That's correct. And the thing is, was not everyone. This is again the massive impact it's having because not everyone is taking their dogs into organisations safely. You know, this is another reason why I'm thankful you gave me the time today. I mean, just since this XL bully amendment has come onto the legislation books, we've had a mad dash to the Scottish border where everyone has been taking the dogs up to the Scottish border so that they wasn't destroyed in England. That's created a massive problem up in Scotland. But
Are
more,
they more lenient than in Scotland?
well, they tend to be, but I think that's a political more than anything because it just gives something else to get bashed over that. Well, you're doing this, and we're so. I think a lot of that could be political, to be perfectly honest. But my main concern is since that happened, it has been reported back to me from rescues that those dogs that did go across the border, the majority of them have gone into the wrong hand.
Oh,
Some of them have been killed already, and it's caused a big vacuum up in Scotland now as well. So, and I'm sure
gosh.
Scotland doesn't need that. But the sickening thing is they are ending up in the wrong hands now, even in England. So they're just being tied up to lampposts, used for breeding, um, beaten to death. Sorry, I didn't want to, get into that, but unfortunately, that is the sad truth. Being drowned in canals, thrown off of bridges. There was actually one recently where it was just thrown off a motorway bridge, all because the government's decided to bring in a legislation because it does create a lot of revenue. And I get upset, Richard, because they keep saying it's for our safety.
Hmm. Well, it's very safe if you're driving up the M1 and a dog comes flying down off a gantry because somebody's decided they can't afford it, or it's in the wrong hands and they can't control it and they just throw it onto the road, and there a big dog lands in front of your car, causes a massive accident. Very much for our benefit. I can see that.
I used to, and I will say, I used to have an argument a lot with the rescue side bringing dogs in, for whatever reason, because they used to say to me, rescue has no borders. You always get this repetition counter argument, and it's
Yes.
in the psyche. And I love all animals, and all animals need help. But for somebody to turn around and say to me that we're the most humane country in the world is deluded, because I actually used to photograph sites on behalf of an organisation where dogs were used for fighting, shallow graves, you know. So when you're trying, so when you've got somebody like me saying shut the border, shut the border, shut the border, and you're coming in and you come on social media after you've been and literally photographed a scene, and then somebody says, "Oh well, you're just racist towards dogs, or for what? You've got a
You,
problem with
you're
foreign dogs."
racist towards dogs.
Yeah, I've heard it all, Richard. I think to myself, what planet are you on? I've literally just been stood in a ditch photographing a dog
Yeah.
that possibly couldn't get rescued because that rescue was taken up by one of the dogs you've brought into the country, and assisted and aided and abetted criminal activity overseas. So until we actually get a handle on what's going on, in our country, it's. I mean, I've seen one particular thing that really did upset me when I was talking to you earlier about the drugs coming in. It's We actually had a husky come in used as a mule, and the bag that it ingested had a full scale seizure. Now, for people like us that have to witness all of this, and we're pleading, please, can somebody do something at the border? And then you've got loads of advocates going, but we love animals. You must hate
Mm.
animals if you don't. We
The,
are literally bursting at the seams. Nobody seems to know what they're doing. Everyone seems to know everything, if that makes sense. And the
yes.
most innocent in society is being punished. So
Yeah.
I don't buy this public safety for 1 minute, Richard.
Kelly, thank you so much for telling us about it. We're sort of coming to the end of the hour,
Sorry.
unfortunately. No, don't be sorry. Sorry. It's a ghastly situation that we're in, not helped by government legislation, as so much isn't. There isn't an easy way out of this, presumably.
There is, Richard.
Oh, there is. I beg your
Yeah,
pardon. There's an
that's
easy
all right.
way out of this, and Kelly's going to tell us. Thank goodness.
So I just would like to ask if people could be a lot more aware of their actions, whether it's indirectly or directly, on the colossal impact it has in general. But also, please become educated on the actual law. And I plead with all the dog expert witnesses and the solicitors that are working on behalf of the families in these closed courts. Please, can you do the right thing and start to educate everybody that's dipped their hands in their pockets to help fight for their dogs on the real law in this country? They need to have proper representation. They need to have trial by jury. It shouldn't be behind closed doors. And to be honest, and I wrote this down from a fantastic man, because just now everyone's exempting their dogs. And when you exempt something in layman's terms, in their terms, it basically means you're presumed a beggar, so therefore you're happy to give up what you're begging for. That's what
You're
exemption,
you're presumed a beggar, and you're
yeah,
happy to give up.
yeah. It's like the license, basically. It's a contract. So don't
Yeah.
sign anything, um, and become very well versed on the law. Because we're not saying we don't need solicitors. We just want solicitors that know how the law actually works.
Kelly, before we go, I
Sorry.
know you wanted no. Before we go, you wanted to say something about a gentleman who had recently died.
Yes, thank you very much. So, a dear friend of ours, his name was Gareth Jenkins. He was the most formidable, fantastic human being I've ever had the pleasure to meet. He brought so many people together, in more ways than one. He spoke truth all the time, and he was known very well over here and internationally. And unfortunately, he passed away on Christmas Eve. So another reason why I'm thankful that I'm able to bring this to public attention today is because I know Gareth would also would like me to come forward and speak my truth on behalf of the dogs, regardless of the backlash that I might get from so-called solicitors and courts and everything else. So thank you. God bless you, Gareth. There, I hope you're kicking some backside wherever you are.
Yeah,
Thank you, Richard.
absolutely. No, it's my pleasure, and thank you for coming on. And hopefully the backlash won't come in that way, because you've not said anything. I don't think that's specifically bad. You're just painting the picture as it is, and people need to know. We all are living in very distracted lives, and we're in very much tight bubbles, and we often don't see what's going on in front of our noses. And you've just painted there, or shown us, stuff that's happening that I had very little knowledge about. And if you're not a pet lover, or you don't have a dog, and you're not associating with other people who've got dogs, how do you know? And it gives a chance for people to get their teeth, and have a good gnaw at the bone, if I can use that, and investigate for themselves, find out if this is going on, talk to their MP. I know MPs are pretty useless, but just keep putting pressure out there so that these terrible practices cease. And I'm very indebted to you to come on the show and talk about a subject which, I would not have known about if you hadn't have come forward. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Could I just say one thing? Sorry, Richard.
It's all right.
A couple of people kept saying about licenses, as we just quickly said.
Mm.
The council issues licenses to breed in puppy farms in this country, and the last count of puppies, this is not including the ones being bred in individual homes, was 88,000 dogs. So for
Wow.
those that are regulating the license, we need to sort it. But I do plead with people to ask their solicitors, their representation, to push for a jury, because ultimately, Richard, and I will end it on this if I may, the jury can repeal the legislation indefinitely under the Constitution of the statute books. And until people are aware of this, this will continue to go on. So I hope that everybody that advocates the ban on breed-specific legislation actually starts to do what they're supposed to do and stick by the law. Thank you
Well,
very much, Richard.
no, it's my pleasure. And if we had trial by jury on all counts of all different things, I think we would have a completely different outcome than the kind of jury system that we have at the moment. Kelly, thank you so much.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate you coming on the show and telling us about that. There you are, ladies and gentlemen, something slightly different. But as you can see, injustice is going on all over the place. And we do try to tell you about it on this show. I will be back with more monologues and other wonderful interviews in due course. But in the meantime, from Kelly, my wonderful guest, thank you so much. Till next time, goodbye.